Welcome, everyone. Great to see you here. As you can probably tell, I'm in Singapore. This is not my actual view from my balcony, but it's very nice anyway. I'm glad everyone could join us, and I'm looking forward to this discussion where we're going to hear from Hervé. Is a great software engineer and practitioner, and there's a lot we can learn from him. If you came to look for this presentation, then you're in the right place. Some of you may have seen something that had a slightly different title, but still the same people. Well, it's still the same presentation. I think the other title that we ran with was how to get developers to use your API, which is essentially the same thing. All of us probably use APIs all the time, and some of us build them. And when we build APIs, there's always that uncertainty about, are people going to use them? How much will they use them? Why aren't they using them? What can we do to help them use them and get the benefit from that? So a quick introduction to API Craft. So I'm John Scheele. I'm based in Singapore. I'm a technology consultant focusing on APIs. I've been in Singapore for about the last 9 years. I started helping to organize the API Craft Singapore meetup group, and since then we've expanded to Indonesia and Thailand. And with Prasant, Prasant, do you want to?
Hey, it's Prashant. I'm based out of Bangalore, India. I've been working with John since last 2 years. I organize the meetup group called API Craft Bangalore and All About APIs India. I'm also a co-organizer for the API Days India, which we held in May 2021.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so we're very pleased to bring the API Days conference to India this year for the first time. And thanks very much, Prasad, for helping to shape that. We've had a lot of great speakers, and you can see recordings of those presentations on the API Days official YouTube channel, if you're interested. And of course, what we will be recording today's presentation. So if you want to catch up with it later, you'll be able to see it on the API Craft YouTube channel. Next slide. So I'm assuming that everybody knows what APIs are, but I think that we're all in a business where we have to explain to other people what APIs are and what they're for. And so I always like to present this even to an audience that already knows what APIs are, because we need to continue to educate everyone we come in contact with about the value of them. So, you know, I like this summary. It's about messaging between systems and hiding complexity. We talk about abstraction, layered approaches and things like that, but really the hiding the complexity from other people so they don't need to worry about it is I think the best way of explaining it. And I often explain it as in terms of in terms of a car. Lots of people know how to drive a car, but very few people actually know how they work internally inside. If you open up the bonnet on a car, and people might be able to wave a hand at the engine, but ask them to point out, maybe they can identify the battery, maybe the engine block, and maybe the distributor and spark plug. They may be able to check the oil and water, but that's about as far as it goes for most people. But the reason many people can drive a car is because they know that if they have a key in the hand, that they can unlock the door, They know what a door is for. They know what a door handle is. They can climb into the car. They see the steering wheel there. They can put the key in the ignition. They see lots of dials on the dash, and they can see out the windows, and they know to look around. And they are all the interfaces to the car. So people don't really know how the car works. That complexity is hidden from them. They only know about the interfaces to the car. And that's good enough for a lot of people. And it's really useful when we're dealing with systems, particularly if they're written in different technologies, different languages. So these selling points for APIs, I don't think it can be repeated often enough. And I often like to start off conversations with this. I want to talk a little bit about APIs as more than just a technology, because they do enable a lot of different things that perhaps wouldn't be possible otherwise. So there are a couple of different business models for APIs. One is for very large enterprises. Salesforce is a customer relationship management solution. It is in many companies the system of record for customer information, and it has a lot of functionality in itself, but it doesn't do everything. But by having that store of customer data, they realize that if they publish some APIs, then other people can build on top of that functionality and extend it. They do simplify things a little bit also. If you prepare an application and put it on their marketplace, and then customers can be billed for that through Salesforce themselves. So the customer doesn't end up with an additional bill. So Salesforce, there are something like 6,000 apps in their marketplace. Shopify, a great e-commerce tool company, they have something like 3,000 apps in their marketplace. Even Xero, the small business accounting software, has over 1,000. And these are all to help companies that want to put together their technology stack in a more seamless way, so that they can operate internally and also with customers. So it's good for customers, it's good for the companies themselves that have a marketplace, and it's also good for other application providers to be able to plug into that. So this is one model, the marketplace model. These are the sorts of applications that can be built on top of Salesforce. Shopify, all the aspects of how to run an e-commerce shop with the storefront and themes and things like that. But there are people who do things like the shipping and fulfillment better than what Shopify can provide, and they provide the applications that build on top of that. Xero, you think accounting is accounting, but in the countries that Xero operates in, there may be another company that has a better interface to the tax department or for payroll or for something else. And so by publishing APIs, they enable their partners to build on top of that base functionality. So that's one model. The other model is what I would call the plug and play model, is where you decide to be the best, very, very best at one thing, and make it easy for other people to incorporate your solution into their workflow. And two prime examples are Twilio for communications and Stripe for payments. Okay, so they're the sort of two business models. But the challenge, if you build an API, whether it's for your own use, if it's for your own use, you'd hope you're doing it well to meet your own needs. If it's for use of other teams within your organization, or if it's for partner firms who are going to build on that functionality, there are some obstacles for them to use it. And this slide is from the Postman's latest State of API report, which talks about, and which asked people, what's the biggest barrier to people using your APIs? And lack of documentation topped the list. Lack of knowledge was also up there. So the inability to use the APIs or the lack of skill in using APIs is another factor. The complexity of them. And, I thought APIs were really meant to solve that problem of complexity. But if you make it just as complex to use your API as to build something themselves, then people are going to build something themselves because they have more control over it. So you really have to think about how to make it less complex for other people. And lack of time. Lack of time, I think, is code for something else, because I think it's probably a combination of lack of knowledge and lack of complexity, and maybe even lack of documentation, because lack of time to use an API, to reuse an asset that somebody else has built, doesn't sound quite right to me. But I think it's an indication that it is an obstacle to try to figure out how to use someone else's API. And so this is why I invited Hervé to talk about how you can improve the way you communicate your API to remove some of these obstacles. I think that's pretty much the last slide I wanted to show, Hervé. Yeah, there are the Postman State of APIs report has a lot of great insights into how people can best use APIs and the barriers to using them. I think, Hervé, you're going to refer to something from SmartBear also. It's very useful to see this sort of feedback about how people use APIs. But at this point, I'm going to introduce Hervé. He's the CEO and co-founder of Quod AI. It's a great startup that's been operating in Singapore for 3 years now, Hervé?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let me just make sure that you can share your screen.
Sure.
Are you? There you
go. Great. So let me share my screen. Let me know when you see it.
Yep, we can see it.
And you should see the title slide.
Yes, we're looking in the title slide.
Great. So thank you so much for everyone for joining. Thank you, John, and Prashant for having me. And so, as John mentioned, some of the barriers of utilization of people using your API is what we're going to be discussing here, and how to bring a great developer experience to your APIs. So most API documentation sucks. I think this was not only reflected by the recent Postman study that John referred to, but it's not only John and me that are just saying this. This is from State of API from the Smart Bears from 2 years ago, where about 35% of the API developers said that the documentation is above average. Only 35% thought of that. And but the positive thing is that 57% of API developers said that documentation is a top priority. And that's from a large-scale survey with over 3,000 people globally. Now, rightfully so, API developers want to focus on documentation. And at the end of the day, there's 3 things that matters for API consumers: ease of use, performance, and detailed documentation. This is also from the Smart Bear study that really showed that ease of use and accurate and detailed documentation was one of the most important factors for them. And what's interesting in the study that you may have noticed is that there's actually a gray bar and a dark gray bar, and they represent the gap between the when the study or the survey was done. And you notice that accurate and detailed documentation and ease of use actually doubled, span of 2 years. So the documentation, great experience, usability, all of those things are becoming more and more important for developers to even like try and consume your APIs. Now, obviously, John also mentioned lack of time, and from the study from Smart Bear, we also see that resources and tooling has been some of the big blockers for API developers to actually improve the documentation, the usability, and the user experience for APIs. And you can see that all the different colors from the chart, it represents different company size. So from small to very large enterprise, those obstacles have been in the way, and it's been pretty consistent regardless of the size of the organization. Now, I guess the question is really, how do we develop a great experience without, it being tedious and cumbersome and resource intensive? So for my talk, I'm going to talk about, what do we mean by good API docs, right? And when I'm going to keep referring to the word documentation, because at the end of the day, it's about the usability of the experience. That's the first experience, the first encounter that other developer API consumers are going to have with your API. The second point I want to talk about is, how do we create great API docs, especially using AI? And finally, oops, it's a typo, but I want to talk about maintenance of API docs and what's beyond after you create that API documentation. All right, so let's jump in with what defines good API documentation. So I extracted two articles, recommendations from Pronovix and Nordic APIs about what are the key components of great APIs. And these are the two lists. And what I then notice is that this really comes down to two things, right? What can I do with the API, right? So usability to find and search the function that I'm looking for in the API, a quick start guide, endpoint definition, and then how can I do it, right? Especially code snippet, example code, and have the ability to actually use what I can do with the API. Another study I looked at is how developers search for code at Google. Now, it's not directly tied to APIs, but Google has this giant application search engine for their own code that's only used internally. And so they spend billions of dollars to develop that. And the majority, over 90% of the developers internally use that code search to find answers. And what we can extract from that, what relates to APIs from that research is the same two things. What can I do and how can I do it, right? So finding example code is one of the biggest requirements for API developers API consumers to start using your APIs, and then exploring and browsing and basically discovering what can I do with the API. Finally, I'm going to look at the Stripe API documentation, obviously the poster child for what is a great API experience. And I want to show that it doesn't really need to be complicated. And Stripe, as Twilio, as John mentioned, are really the great examples of how you can monetize APIs and make it very popular. So again, like looking at the two elements, what can I do and how can I do it? They're clearly apparent in the Stripe documentation with the easy to search menu and the table of content that really allows for a great browsing and searching experience. Browsing for when you don't really know what you're looking for, and searching when you really know what you're looking for. And finally, how can I do it? Example code, very critical in different languages, the response, as well as a detailed description of all the parameters. And so that doesn't, it doesn't take a lot of, it's not really that complicated. It's just a single page with a menu and then documentation text. Great. So I guess how does this apply to what, how you develop APIs and how you can provide a better experience for developers? So I'm going to go into a demo of what we do here at Quod AI. I'm going to give you a tour of the application that we're going to build API documentation for. The application is called Wins. It's basically a Spotify clone, podcast, RSS feed reader. Then I'm going to show you how we can create that documentation with Quod AI very easily in just a few minutes. And then I'll go beyond and show how we can maintain and generate code comments even with Quod AI for that particular. So let me switch to giving you a quick tour of the Wins application. Can you see the Wins application right now? You should see like a,
We're
like a
looking at
podcast.
the browser. Yeah, welcome to
Okay.
Wins. Yeah.
Okay, great, awesome. So this is what I want to show you. So Wins is a, it's a podcast application, just like a Spotify. You can subscribe. I'm just going to give you a tour of what the application does, and obviously it's powered by an API. I'm going to document it without having the involvement of the authors or the committers of the repository. So for example, you have like this podcast feed here. You can see that you can bookmark the feed, you can tweet it, you can do a bunch of things, you can organize it in folders. So that's kind of overview of the Wins API. And it's open source, luckily. And what you'll find here is the actual source code for Wins. And obviously it has an API, and it has an extensive API that controlled everything that's been powered by the web interface that I just showed you. So from here on, what I'm going to do is go to Quod AI. And when I go to Quod AI, what I'm going to do is just simply add the repository of GetWins to Quod AI. And basically what we do at Quod AI is that we're going to pull that repo, do a git pull, and then break all the code into files, and then those files we're going to break them into methods or snippets, and then we're going to run AI models on it. And what I'm about to show you right now is completely AI generated, right? So this is, after adding the GetString Wins repository to Quod AI, we get this nice search bar, and so I'm going to take the scenario of us wanting to document the podcast API. How do we, let's say we want to build our own, offer other developers to build their own clients for the Wins podcast API. Let's say do a mobile version or a React version or whatnot. So what I can do is, start typing podcast, and one of the things that's really nice about Quod AI is that you get autocomplete. So you get to learn about the domain of the repository without knowing much details about it. Right? So once I research the podcast, I'm going to filter it down. And so our AI models also detect not only business concept like follow, podcast, and follow, but also technical concepts. So I want to focus on the HTTP request, right? And so we're going to use basically the HTTP request, the client side, to actually document the podcast API. And so obviously this relies on the fact that you may have tests, or you may have a sample front end, or a usage of the API inside your repository in order to do this, right? So here we can see that this is, it seems like it's a fetch call to an HTTP request to the podcast API podcast to actually get the single podcast. So as you can see, Quod AI generated all this automatically. So this is AI models looking at the code and actually generating a summary or a question rather of the code that is actually represented here. So there's no annotations, no XML, no JSON or annotations that you need to add into your code in order to do this. This just works out of the box if you have a Git repository. So yeah, so I'm going to add it to a collection. So that name my collection podcast API. So I'm going to create that collection, and this is like, obviously if somebody wants to use the podcast API, I can just use this code. There's a get the podcast by ID. I can just quickly add it to that collection. And And then it's kind of like what I'm doing right now is a bit like using the watch later feature on YouTube. It's like creating a playlist of snippets of code that I can rearrange later. So yeah, I'm gonna keep adding those snippets of code inside the collection. And what's gonna happen is that I'm going to go to the collections tab, and here's my podcast API, kind of ready to be browsed and used just like the Stripe API. So you have a nice summary here, again, completely auto-generated by AI. You have some nice tags that augment the information about the code itself, and that allows for a browsing experience that's that will help others, other API consumers discover more API functions. You have the main author that have been extracted, or main contributors of this code that have been extracted automatically using the Git metadata. And so the nice thing is that, let's say you have this like, this test that kind of like gives you an overview of what the entire API can do. And that's the first thing you want to show to your API consumers. You can put it here. You can add nice comments to add more details if you'd like. So, for example, podcast ID should be a Mongo DB ID, not an integer. You can add clarification. So, yeah, that's kind of like the introduction and the kind of Stripe-like page for API documentation. Your API consumers can easily search for Get podcast or whatever they need, or even use a search bar here to further search the repository. They can filter by files or by different tags. So now, if you want to kind of go, I'm going to move into the second part of this, which is the maintenance of the API documentation. You can easily, what happens if you update the code, if you change the API functions parameter, if you change the URLs. The beauty is that Quod AI, because it's connected to your GitHub repositories, will use a webhook to simply update the documentation automatically. So there's nothing for you to do, but just reorganize the collections once the code has been updated. If you want, you can always open the code inside your VS Code, which can be done directly from the API from the Quod AI application. So you can just press on this, and then it will just open VS Code automatically. Can you see my VS Code now, or?
Right now we're seeing the website, but as you were talking, sure. I noticed the algorithm is taking all this code and then it's framing questions that developers would typically ask, like, how do I use this? How do I test this? And those sorts of this, I think, is one of the hardest things to do, because for a person who's writing code, whether it's an API or any piece of code, is because when we write code, we have a picture in our mind of how it works internally, and we very often don't ask the sorts of questions about how someone would interact with it, or what they really need. So I was intrigued by some of these. You highlight one of those. How to get single podcast by ID is one of those things there.
Right.
That is somebody who comes to some code is thinking, I want to get there now. I don't want to wade through all that other code. I want to get to that part first. But I guess I'm intrigued as to how you develop this model to frame these questions, because you had to train it somehow. So what are the sorts of things that you went through to think like a developer who just wants to get to that piece of code that they really need right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, John. Well, basically, we have first of all a great team of data scientists, also based out of Singapore, that have built 13 different AI models for each different languages that we support. Today we support 5 programming languages, including JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, Ruby, and Python. And we trained models on over 1.7 billion lines of code to basically understand and create this, if let's say, a word vector space of the mapping between natural language and the code itself. In addition, we have our own internal data analyst team that analyze different patterns within open source repositories to understand, the concept of HTTP API, HTTP requests, database entities, ORM queries, SQL queries, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the two sort of factors of the business and the technical terms that are found from the code, and that we be able to reproduce in an AI model that can predict those from a snippet of code.
I guess the problem with any system is that unless you make it the center of what you do, it's either going to be an afterthought or you'll never deal with it again. It's why people have trouble using a diary or calendar, because if they don't actually look at the calendar to see what they're going to do today, then it's pointless putting all that data into it. But I guess by making GitHub the center of what people do, which is what software developers do now, if they continue to make it the center of what they do, then they get these sorts of hints and documentation, and the way it's framed as brought from that. But it's not something they have to write afterwards. They have to write the code, and then they have to think about how to describe it. It's sort of describing. It's not exactly self-describing, because what I think a lot of people have tried to write self-describing code before. What I think you've done is sort of flipped it and said, well, actually, it's not about describing what the code does. It's about what do I need to do with it, and what am I trying to achieve. But you just created an extension for VS Code.
That's right. So we have the VS Code extension that basically reproduces everything that I've shown you on the web, and does even more. It can generate code comments automatically. And we also have a GitHub extension and a Jira GitLab extension. So let's go back to the stream's source code. What I'm going to show you now is like an example issue of an issue from the Wins repository itself. And what you'll see is that when we integrate into, I think it's a great comment that what you said, John, is that you need to integrate with the tools that developers use in order to be not an afterthought. And so, for example, this is an issue about retaining folders, because you can organize podcasts into folders. Our AI models look at the title of the issue and the summary and the description, and then will generate suggestions automatically from the source code. So all of those search suggestions are specific and personalized to your repository. So as you can see here, retain folders from Feedly. You can jump directly into the search onto folders API, and it will give you exactly what you need in terms of helping or enhancing or fixing the bug on that issue. Cool. So now, and let me go back to my presentation. Second. Great. Oops. Yeah. So this is the kind of a summary of what I've just discussed. Improving developer experience and bringing it to your API is all about improving the first entry point that developers are going to have, or API consumers are going to have from your APIs. And it boils down to documentation and explaining clearly what you can do with the API and how you can do it, right? And so as a reminder, what I do is as much as possible giving this browsing ability, table of content like Stripe, or what we've done with collections in Quod AI, or free text search. If developers, as John mentioned, really just want to know something very specific, like I just want to do something and I know what I'm looking for. Obviously, giving them the ability to further explore, maybe like using the tags, like what we have with podcasts here, and give a description of an automated description of what the API function does, and then how can I do it, right? So sample code, giving additional comments, and all of this can be kept lightweight because our AI model is always keeping up to date with your source code as a source of truth of what your documentation can be. And as you can see, I just created this documentation in just a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Hervé. I'm going to open up to questions. If everybody has, feel free to type in the chat, or we can also bring you on because this is a meeting and you can turn your cameras on. But I had just a question. So you started this company on the basis that it takes new developers, when they join a team or join a company, too long to come up to speed, to learn about all the different pieces of code that are already there and how it works. And that was your premise, to get them further up the learning curve as fast as possible so that they can be a productive member of the team. Question, what's the learning curve like for Quod AI? What are the sorts of things what's the learning curve for the thing that improves gets you further up the learning curve?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think one of the metrics that we use at Quod AI is really, related to cycle time, right? So when somebody the product manager has decided of a feature, and how long it takes for when it was decided and put into the sprint backlog, all the way to when it's in the hands of users. And so, for us, like I think our most recent onboarding, it took him 2 days to do that. And that's really something that we pride ourselves in. And it's just like onboarding as fast as possible. And we do use Quod AI on Quod AI, so to make it easier.
Mm-hmm. And so there are different ways of using Quod AI in the tool of your choice. So there's GitHub, obviously. To activate it on GitHub, you create an account on Quod AI first, and then connect to your GitHub repo. Yeah,
so we can log in using GitHub or GitLab. So we support both authentication methods. So it's safer. What we usually go through is like download the Chrome extension first, the GitHub Bitbucket GitLab integration first, so that it starts from the issue or the ticket that you want to fix, because we always want to have a purpose when we're searching for something, not just searching for the sake of searching. So from there, you can really do everything that you want. Otherwise, you can find us on VS Code Marketplace. Just search for Quod AI, and from there you can also, it will take you to log in and
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I'm happy to open up the floor to any questions of Hervé. None at the moment? That's okay. You can find us quite easily. I think you can certainly find me and also Prasant on LinkedIn. There we are. And of course, Hervé left his details there. So feel free to connect with us. If you have any questions, we're going to share the recording of this presentation in the next few days, and you'll be able to share it with your friends and be able to explain why you do it in the first place, why you want to make a better experience for other developers, but then some of the tools and techniques, and also the thinking. I think the the way you frame the questions that come up on the screen is really quite powerful, Hervé, because it helps the creator think more in the shoes of the person who's going to consume their work, which is a constant struggle. But thanks very much, Hervé. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you at the next meetup. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Prasanth. Thank you, everyone.